never divisive. So I hope to keep on working with her as I've always done, and I want to thank her on behalf of the unity of our group. And let me switch off to French, because, you know, French is, as you know, the second official language of our assembly. Monsieur le Président,
Dear President, dear colleagues, it was such a great honor to present my candidacy to you this morning in this beautiful town of Madrid. Madrid, where I had the honor of accompanying our President, Jerry Connelly, and our Secretary General, Roxana Popa, in last June during a historical summit. First, I'd like to congratulate Zaida Contara and all of the Spanish parliamentary delegation for their wonderful organization. And dear President, dear Jerry Connelly, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your vision, for your dynamism, for your ethics, for your humanity at the service of our Assembly and at the service of each member of this Assembly. Just like Jerry, I myself have a lot of ambition for our Parliamentary Assembly. Our Assembly is a crucial element in our international action at the service of our ideas and values. I want our Assembly to become stronger, to become more respected within NATO and beyond. It is our responsibility, indeed, our responsibility, NATO parliamentarians, to be people who safeguard, to be people who will convey messages to our citizens and to tell our citizens that nothing is more important than our democratic values. In February 2014, I was on the Maidan Square in Kiev. I was there supporting our Ukrainian friends. At the same moment, Russia was challenging the principle of the intangibility of borders. At that time, Russia was showing an imperialistic determination, one that I had already observed while I was in Prague during the dark years of the Soviet dictatorship. And back at that time, I decided to go into politics in order to help the Eastern populations to break their shackles. At my very modest level, of course. For too long, our Western societies had believed that Russia had changed. For too long, we remained deaf to the warnings sent by our friends from the Eastern countries. For too long, we were blind to the potential of arrival of a new war on our European territory. Now, no doubt, is possible. And in the face of Russian leaders, which are acting like real terrorists, showing barbarism that has been unseen before by attacking civilian infrastructures and civilians, we have to do something, and they will have to be judged as such, as terrorists, in front of international tribunals. And as NATO parliamentarians, we must support Ukraine. We must support its people, the Ukrainian people, which every day shows courage and resilience in the service of these values, of our values of freedom, democracy, and sovereignty. Never in the past has our individual and collective responsibility been so great, and never have the stakes been so important. NATO member states have shown exceptional unity when they supported and in supporting Ukraine, and I think we can be very proud of that. It's now up to us to show the same resolve, unity, and cohesion within our Parliamentary Assembly. It's only in this way that we will be stronger and that we will be respected. And we will show that through our parliamentary diplomacy, that we will be more able to support NATO's efforts for peace and security in the fight against disinformation, in the fight against fake news, which weakens the heart of our institutions. Every day we will have to reaffirm the core and the primacy of our democratic values in the face of these authoritarian regimes. We are welcoming Sweden and Finland like we welcomed Montenegro and North Macedonia before that. We are also creating the Center for Democratic Resilience. All of these elements, I think, will help us to go in that direction. We'll also need to develop a strategic thinking and a watch on the Indo-Pacific region and on other countries in the area. We also need to develop ties with other assemblies, such as with the UN, with the European Council, and with the ASEAN. We also need to think about our armies, our youth, and I will put forward initiatives that I had already exposed while I was Vice President, and also here I'm very happy about the prize for women, peace and security. All of these initiatives will enrich our Euro-Atlantic alliance. We contributed to the strategic concept. We have shown that we could do it, and we will show that we will be able to contribute in more ways. Thanks also to our wonderful team, to the wonderful secretariat of the NATO PA. We will, of course, need to keep a close watch on what happens following the last Madrid summit, and I'm looking forward to Vilnius. We will have to look at what NATO does when it comes to the impact of climate change on security, whether it's linked to migration or whether it's looking at the supply in rare earth, hydrocarbons and other raw materials. We also have to follow the works on research in tomorrow's weapons and equipment. We need to look into war economies as well that will help us to face future strategic challenges. And we have to show authoritarian regimes that they are not more efficient in this matter than we are. And we have shown that as well with COVID, that democratic states work better. Finally, we are creating a working group as well in different ways. And with this working group, we once again are putting forward our principles of democracy, of transparency. And in this working group, everyone can be heard without any necessary political party considerations, and working group that will better support our parliamentary work. And it's in this kind of dialogue, in this spirit of exchange and debate, that I want to lead this fight in order to support the cohesion of our alliance. And everything I do here is also in full support of Ukraine. It's a moral contract and an ethical contract that we have with Ukraine, and this must bind us. And therefore, it's very humbly that after having served our assembly for 14 years, that I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart with sincerity. I'd like to thank you for the honor that you are granting me, that you're giving me by electing me as president, by allowing me to continue to work at your service, at the service of the Assembly, at the service of each and every one of us, for our values, for our freedoms, for the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, and for all of us. We must stay united, we must stay strong. Long live the Alliance, long live Ukraine, long live the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, long live democracy. And once again, dear President, a very heartfelt thank you.
Thank you so much, Joelle, our Madam President-elect. And Mimi, thank you for your service and your graciousness. We really appreciate both of you and the wonderful service you provided to this assembly. Our next item is a coffee break. However, before we leave, We are going to start precisely at 11 o'clock to resume with Secretary General Stoltenberg, who's on a hard deadline. So we're going to have an hour and a half with him in terms of Q&A. So if you got your questions, send them forward. Be here at 11. Thank you. We're in recess.
Así. Coges los vasos sucios y las botellas y los cambias todo, ¿vale? Lo pones limpio, ¿vale? ¿Sabes dónde tienes para ponerlo? Justo aquí, mira. Aquí tienes, a la que bajas las escaleras a la derecha tienes para reponerlo todo, ¿vale? Mira, ¿vale? Intenta no mover demasiado las banderas. ¿Vale?
Yeah, we're looking at that. We're seeing if the yeah.
Giusto passato? Tranquilli. What do you mean?
Gospodo Australianos.
Sorry.
Gospodo Australianos.
I'm sorry.
Pizza. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. Thank you so much again.
Congratulations once again.
Thank you so much, and I'm thankful your support for us.
Ja sam radio. Ovo je rekao.
Ahora, porque no sé de traducción.
If people could take their seats, because the Secretary General is on a hard stop.
Great to see
Oh my God, how are you? So good to see you. Excuse me for not getting up. If we could take our seats and Secretary General Stoltenberg, if you can join us. Ladies and gentlemen, if you please will take your seats, we can get started. I want to welcome His Excellency Jens Stoltenberg again. The Secretary General of NATO is no stranger to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And I want to thank Jens personally for so actively and readily engaging with us over the years. During my time as President, our dialogue and cooperation has been deep and substantive, from the NATO 2030 reflection process to the development of the strategic concept. You took great care to take the Assembly's views to heart. Your determined leadership in support of Ukraine in this depraved and unprovoked and brutal war remains exemplary. It's been a great pleasure working with you. Anyone who would like to ask the Secretary General a question after his address, raise your hand as soon as possible and we'll get you on the list. And I thank the Secretary General in advance for his patience. He's always been responsive and we really appreciate that. We will set a 1-minute limit for questions, so we ask you please to be concise and efficient, and the questions will end at 12:50. Secretary General, we welcome you to the rostrum. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your wonderful leadership of this alliance.
So, good morning, President Connolly, dear Jerry. It's great to see you again. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'll just put this over here. And President Gill and President Batet, thank you for hosting all of us here today. And good morning, honorable members of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and their friends and colleagues. I think I have to wait until it's quiet in the audience.
I would ask people please to take their seats and ancillary conversations out of the room. We want to make sure we have full attention to what the Secretary General wants to share with us, especially given events going on here in Europe. I thank you, Mr. Secretary General.
It is always a pleasure to address this assembly, and it's always a pleasure to be back in Madrid. Last time I came to Madrid was when we had the magnificent NATO summit here in June, and I think that both the hosting of the summit and also the hosting of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly demonstrates the very strong commitment by Spain to our transatlantic alliance. The Madrid summit took some very important decisions at the critical time for our alliance. We made bold decisions on a long range of issues, and let me just mention a few. We decided to step up our support to Ukraine, further strengthen our deterrence and defense, and invite Finland and Sweden to become NATO members. We also adopted the Madrid strategic concept to adapt the alliance to a more dangerous and a more competitive world. So the summit in Madrid was really a transformative summit. And now, as we look ahead to our summit in Vilnius in Lithuania next year, we are implementing the decisions we took in Madrid. First, on Ukraine. President Putin made two big strategic mistakes when he invaded Ukraine in February this year. He underestimated the Ukrainians' bravery and will to fight, and he underestimated the unity and relentless resolve by NATO allies and partners to support Ukraine. He thought he could defeat Ukraine in a matter of days. 9 months later, Russia continues to face setback after setback. And Ukrainians continue to liberate their territory from occupation, most recently Kherson. But it would be a great mistake to underestimate Russia. It retains significant military capabilities and a high number of troops. Russia is willing to suffer substantial casualties and is willing to inflict horrific suffering on the Ukrainian people. We have seen drones and missiles striking Ukrainian cities, civilians, and critical infrastructure. So we must be prepared to support Ukraine for long haul. Yes, I know that this support comes with a price. In our countries, many people face a cost of living crisis. Energy and food bills are rising. These are tough times for many. But the price we pay as NATO allies is measured in money, while the Ukrainians pay a price which is measured in blood. And if we allow Putin to win, all of us have to pay a much higher price. Authoritarian regimes around the world will learn that they can get what they want with brute force. This would have direct consequences for our security. It will make the world more dangerous and us more vulnerable. That's the reason why we cannot allow President Putin to win in Ukraine. So we need to stay the course together. And I count on all of you as members of parliament to keep making the case for supporting Ukraine. Second, deterrence and defense. We have been strengthening our defenses since 2014 in response to Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. We have implemented the biggest reinforcement of collective defense since the end of the Cold War. Now we are doing even more to prevent the conflict in Ukraine from escalating beyond Ukraine. So we have doubled the number of battle groups in the eastern part of the lines from 4 to 8, increased our ability to reinforce them up to brigade level. And we are putting more troops on higher readiness, so they can respond faster wherever and whenever needed. To do all this, we need to invest more in defense. We have already made, as you know, many significant decisions, and we have made together a lot of progress. 2022 will be the 8th consecutive year of increased defense spending across Europe and Canada. By the end of the year, we will have spent well over 350 billion extra US dollars on defense since we made the pledge in 2014 across Europe and Canada. At the summit in Vilnius, defense investments will be an important topic, and I expect allies to continue making progress, including with commitments beyond 2024, because 2% of GDP on defense should be considered a floor, not a ceiling for our defense investments. Here again, I continue to count on your support. Third, resilience. One of the main messages in the Madrid strategic concept is the link between strong defenses and strong societies. The war in Ukraine has exposed some key vulnerabilities. For too long, we have been dependent on Russian oil and gas to heat our homes and fly our jets. And we have seen how Russia has weaponized energy and tried to use it to blackmail us and to prevent us from supporting Ukraine. But Putin has not succeeded. Allies are now diversifying their supplies. We are moving away from fossil energies and investing in renewable sources. This is good for our security and it's good for the climate. But we need to be careful not to create new dependencies, most notably on China. We see growing Chinese efforts to control our critical infrastructure, supply chains, and key industrial sectors. Chinese rare earth minerals are present everywhere, including in our phones, our cars, and our military equipment. We cannot give authoritarian regimes any chance to exploit our vulnerabilities and undermine us. For this, it is essential that we boost the resilience of our societies and our infrastructure. Resilience is a collective effort, and I count on you all to play your part here too. Finally, Finland and Sweden. In Madrid, all allies made the historic decision to invite these two countries to join NATO. We signed the accession protocols, and now the ratification process is almost completed, with 28 out of 30 allies having already ratified. In Madrid in June, Turkey, Finland, and Sweden signed the trilateral memorandum. Finland and Sweden have delivered on their commitments. They are strong partners of our joint fight against terrorism. So the time has come to finalize the accession process and to welcome Finland and Sweden as full members of NATO. This will make our alliance stronger and our people safer. We must also step up our cooperation with our partners near and far, with those most affected by Russian aggression and coercion, like the Republic of Moldova, Georgia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and with all like-minded countries around the world, from Latin America to the Middle East and North Africa to the Indo-Pacific region. We share security interests and face the same challenges. We can and should tackle them together to defend freedom against oppression, democracy against tyranny, and to uphold the international rules-based institutions that benefit all of us. So, President Connolly, dear Jerry, I know these values are dear to you. NATO is dear to you. And as President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, over the past 2 years, you have done an extraordinary job to make the transatlantic bond and NATO even stronger. You and I, we have worked together, and I have enjoyed our excellent relationship. I thank you for your remarkable leadership of this Assembly, and I look forward to working with your successor, Senator Gazamayam, to prepare for the Vilnius Summit next July. So thank you so much for excellent cooperation. And with that, I'm actually ready to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Great job. Thank you so much. So again, I ask people please to be disciplined and try to frame your question in 1 minute so that we can maximize answers. We're going to do, as we usually do, take 3 questions, three in a row so that Secretary General can try to answer them also efficiently. So the first 3 questions are Zaida Cantera of Spain, Yehor Chenyev of Ukraine, and Julie Jishowitz of Canada. Zaida, you go first.
Spanish. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Welcome to Spain. I hope that once again you have been warmly welcomed by this. And on behalf of the Spanish delegation that I represent, we have grave concern, as conveyed here so often, about the Ukrainian peoples. We know the three pillars. We need to win a war. We have enough freedom of action, the capacity of execution and the maneuvers, and one that is absolutely essential, that is the will to win. The will to win of the Ukrainian people is being proven, and it seems unbreakable. But winter is here, it's coming, and today in the media we can see how the first snowfalls are falling strongly, and this affects the civilian population hardly. They lack the energy, the water, because they have been cruelly destroyed by Putin. So it's difficult to confront this hardship. What are we going to do in NATO to support the Ukrainian people and their willingness to win, not being used to make the Ukrainian people sit down and negotiate?
And within the time limit. Yehor?
Solomia.
Solomia.
Yes, thank
you.
All right. Mr. Secretary General, there's a question from Ukraine, I see here. The very simple and clear question and message. Don't you think that's at the high time to denounce the founding act on mutual relations, cooperation and security between NATO and the Russian Federation, which was signed in Paris once in 1997? I think we faced totally 150% new reality, and this founding act is no more can be valid since even 2013. How we will face the new Russia, how NATO will face the new Russia after finally it will be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomia. And finally, for this set, Julie.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And Secretary General, I want to say a huge thanks to you for your extraordinary leadership during these unprecedented and troubling times. It was our honor to welcome you to visit the Canadian Arctic earlier this year. It's the first time a Secretary General of NATO has ever done so. Can you speak to the next steps for NATO in strengthening Euro-Atlantic security in the Arctic? And the second question I'd like to ask is, the warfare of the 21st century is increasingly very different than the past, with the increase in the acceleration of cyber attacks, interference in our elections and democracy, misinformation, disinformation, and foreign actors in our country threatening our citizens on our own soil. So I'm talking about these Chinese police that's setting themselves up in countries like the UK and Canada and others. What are your thoughts on how prepared NATO is to address this new warfare? Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First to the question from Spain about the situation in Ukraine and also the possibility for negotiations. So first of all, the only answer to your concerns is to ensure that NATO allies are stepping up and providing more support. Because yes, you have absolutely right, winter is coming and Russia continues to attack, to use drones and missiles to attack critical infrastructure, and we should not underestimate the capabilities of Russia also to continue the war. So for me, that should only motivate even more support. I welcome the recent announcement by Spain to step up support to Ukraine, including with air defense systems, Hawk batteries, but also other types of support, and also many other NATO allies and partners around the world have recently made additional announcements, and including NATO is stepping up what we also do when it comes to winter clothing and fuel and other things, tents and other types of supplies that will enable the Ukrainians to also operate throughout the winter. Then on negotiations, of course, we all want this war to end, but we need to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression, where one country, Russia, has invaded a neighbor, Ukraine. And therefore, it matters how those negotiations are conducted, and we need to realize that this war most likely will end at some stage at the negotiating table. But we also know that the outcome of those negotiations are totally dependent on the strength on the battlefield. So if we want an outcome which is acceptable for Ukraine, an outcome that ensures that Ukraine can prevail as a sovereign, independent, democratic nation in Europe, the best way of achieving that is to provide military support to Ukraine. So if we want an acceptable, peaceful, political solution, we need to provide military support to Ukraine. Because as we all know, if President Putin stops fighting, then we will have peace. If President Zelensky and Ukrainians stop fighting, then Ukraine will cease to exist as an independent democratic nation in Europe. So yes, we want negotiations, but we also want an outcome that ensures a sovereign, independent Ukraine and ensures that a brutal use of force is not awarded. Then the question from Ukraine. We have to understand what has happened. It is correct that for many years NATO strived for a better and constructive relationship with Russia. We established the NATO-Russia Council, the Founding Act, and in the strategic concept we agreed in Lisbon in 2010, as the strategic concept that was actually valid until Madrid, June this year. We refer to Russia as a strategic partner. That has totally changed. In the strategic concept we agreed in Madrid in June, we refer to Russia not as a strategic partner, but we refer to Russia as the most imminent threat against NATO allies. And that's also the reason why we have invested so much in our collective defense and why NATO allies have provided unprecedented military support to Ukraine. Russia has walked away from the initiatives, the structures that we established to develop a more constructive relationship with Russia and to have a meaningful dialogue with Russia. So as long as Russia continues to behave in the way they behave now, and especially against Ukraine, there is no way we can have a meaningful dialogue with Russia. Then on Canada, yes, you are right. I had the privilege, the honor of being the first Secretary General of NATO visiting the Canadian High North. That was, for me, an important visit because I was able to see firsthand how the High North is important, of course, for Canada, North America, but also for the whole alliance. The shortest way for Russian missiles to hit the North American continent is not over the Atlantic, but it's over the North Pole, over the High North. So the cooperation between North America, or between the United States and Canada, NORAD up in the High North, where I was able to see some of the sites, is critical for the defense of North America and therefore also for the whole NATO alliance. The High North has become more and more important, partly because Russia has significantly increased their military presence, reopened all Soviet-era bases, infrastructure, deployed more submarines, more advanced nuclear weapons, and also because we know that the High North, the North Atlantic, that is about the vital link between North America and Europe, and NATO is about that link. So to protect the High North, to have presence in the High North, is absolutely essential for the whole alliance. The last thing I will say is that NATO, of course, is present in the High North. Seven out of 8 Arctic countries, of the 8 members of the North Atlantic of the Arctic Council, are NATO members or soon to become NATO members, Finland and Sweden. So NATO is also, of course, an Arctic alliance. You had one more question on that. Yeah, that was China. Well, as I said, resilience, the protection of our societies, our infrastructure, is now very high on the NATO agenda. and again, the Madrid summit reflects a huge change. In the previous strategic concept, China was not mentioned with a single word. In the current strategic concept, the challenges that China poses to our security, to our values, to our interests, is addressed. And part of that also is to be aware of how China is coming closer and trying also to control critical parts of our societies.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. The next three questions are Mike Turner from the United States, Osman Bak from Turkey, and Mimi Kadeli from Albania. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, thank you. You have been a strong, unwavering, and unambiguous voice on the issue of Ukraine. I appreciate the fact that you have been that international strength. My question to you is about the strategic concept. In addition to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, their nuclear blackmail, their threatening capitals of NATO nations, it needs to be, I think, an additional focus. On paragraph 21 in the strategic concept, missile defense is raised. As you know, NATO unfortunately has, and NATO allies individually as a policy, have not aggressively pursued missile defense because they saw it as provocative. Now, obviously, it is almost defense malpractice not to pursue missile defense. Israel has proven that it is both cost-effective, works, and de-escalatory. I wondered if you'd talk for a minute about the need for NATO and NATO allies to pursue missile defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Osman.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Secretary General. The grain deal was, I'm here. The grain deal was recently renewed in Istanbul for a further 120 days. Although Russia had threatened to withdraw from the agreement, finally the Russian blockade on Ukraine ports remains removed, allowing safe passage to grain ships to world markets. The renewal of the grain deal is clearly a diplomatic success. Exchange of prisoners of war in Istanbul was another important achievement. I would like to know your comments on the implications of these steps for the future and what steps we should take to avoid food crisis and secure the food supply to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Osman. And Mimi.
Thank you, President. A part of all the military actions that we are having, I think that only through the Parliamentary Assembly NATO can express its full potential. So we are a community of values, united in our commitment to parliamentary democracies, individual freedoms, human rights, and rule of law. It is our obligation to engage, raise awareness, and support our governmental and intergovernmental defense and security structures. So I think that by doing so, as our colleague Osman mentioned, military actions, diplomacy, and raise up our Parliamentary Assembly position, do you think it's going to be a better way to afford this Russian aggression and this situation we are all together living in? Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi, and I thank all of our 6 questioners so far for staying within their time limit. Really appreciate it. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First, the question from Mike Turner on air and missile defense. First of all, it's always great to see you, and you are absolutely right that air and missile defense has always been important, but it's becoming even more important, and we see the devastating effects of missiles in Ukraine. NATO has stepped up what we do on our integrated air and missile defense. Many of the systems are, both for cruise and for ballistic missiles, and we are investing more, and especially many of the 5th generation aircrafts are extremely important as part of an integrated air and missile defense. just after invasion, we have significantly increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance, on land, at sea, and in the air. And all these domains are areas where we actually have significant also air and missile defense capabilities. Both our planes, but also our ships have air and missile capabilities, which are extremely valuable now, and we can quickly reinforce if needed with more planes and more ships in particular. And also here in Spain, you have the Rota base, where the Aegis, U.S. Aegis ships are based, and they're also, as you know, important for missile defense. So I take note of what you say. You are right. We need to do more, and we also need to discuss the design and how we integrate the different NATO capabilities to ensure that we get the maximum air and missile defense out of what we invest in our missile and air defense systems. Turkey, Osman, it's always great to see you. We met in Istanbul, but we also met here in Madrid at the summit, and you were in the room where we negotiated the agreement with Finland and Sweden. And you also know that when I visited Istanbul just a couple of weeks ago, I commended Turkey and President Erdogan for the grain deal, which Turkey facilitated, and that has proven extremely important, and also the extension of the grain deal. Actually, when I was in Istanbul, I saw the ships with grain passing through the Bosporus, and this is important for the food prices, especially for the poor countries of the world. So the grain deal has proven extremely important, and we must ensure that it continues. Also, the agreement to have exchange of prisoners of war is something that Turkey and President Erdogan facilitated, and of course also much welcomed by allies. And you also know that my message when I was in Istanbul was exactly the same as my message here today, is that Finland and Sweden have delivered on the trilateral memorandum, so the time has come to finalize the ratification process, and I will continue to convey this message, as I also continue to convey to Finland and Sweden that of course they have to engage in a long-term partnership with NATO in general, and with Turkey in particular on the fight against terrorism. They've also welcomed the permanent mechanism that has been established as part of the memorandum to ensure that in particular Finland and Sweden continues to work closely with Turkey also in the future to fight terrorism, because you know that no other NATO ally has suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey, and we saw the brutal terrorist attack in Istanbul just a few days ago, a stark reminder of the brutality of terrorism and the casualties that inflicts on allies, but in particular Turkey. Albania, Mimi. No, I think you're absolutely right that values are of course the core of this alliance, and we should never forget that. Let me also add that I think also parliamentarians, and you as NATO parliamentarians and parliaments in general, they are extremely important now, because we need to ensure that when NATO governments are ready to continue to provide support to Ukraine, that they have the support from the parliamentarians and from their voters. There's no way we can stand for long haul, provide support for Ukraine for months and perhaps even years if we don't have the support from you. So you actually play extremely critical role in ensuring the support from parliaments and from the voters for sustained support from NATO allies to Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Our next three questioners are Anne Genete of France, Luca Frusone of Italy, and Salima Belhaj of Netherlands. And Salima, I want to thank you for a wonderful gift of tulip bulbs from Holland, which I will plant this spring. Thank you so much. Anne.
Je vais m'exprimer. I will now go and speak in French. Mr. Secretary General, with the new brutal and justified aggression of Ukraine by Russia, our alliance must now face a major strategic shock. It has been able to respond to this shock and therefore has been able to reestablish its legitimacy. We have been able to anchor the principle of a defensive material support in a sustainable way to Ukraine, which is decisive in order to support the Ukrainian people, which has been very courageous and very resilient, and this is something that is of great impression to us. We also see that this support is complemented by the European Union, which is also working to help the Ukraine with material collective assistance, namely thanks to the European Peace Facility. I think that this complementarity will be enhanced once Finland and Sweden will be part of NATO. So what do we need to do in order to accelerate this? Thank you.
And Luca.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the coming months, Russia, taking advantage of winter, will try to stock up on weapons, especially missiles. The role of sanctions will become even more important in constraining their supply chain. However, we have seen that shortages of semiconductors and raw materials can also affect allied countries, especially if we consider China's monopoly on rare earths or critical materials. You already mentioned that, Secretary General, but there does not seem to be an advanced awareness of this yet. So I wonder how member countries can jointly improve those aspects relating to supply chains and what the role of NATO, which for me is fundamental, can be in all this. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. And Salima.
Thank you, President. On behalf of the Dutch delegation, I express our solidarity with the Ukrainian people in its resistance to Russian aggression. We continue with our support for Ukraine, also an establishment of a special tribunal. We were glad to hear yesterday by the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Ms. Kostin, that the recent verdict of the Netherlands court undowning of the MH17 last week is of a great importance in holding Russia responsible for the committed crimes, and that these experiences in the MH17 case will be used. I would like also to thank NATO, you as the Secretary General, and our allies, especially our friends from Poland and partners, for the calm response to the missile incident in a Polish village that killed 2 people last week. In such situations, it's of utmost importance to remain calm, investigate and not unnecessarily escalate the precarious situation or jump into conclusions prematurely. We hope that the Secretary General can tell us how he sees this, but also how he sees in the future, if incidents happen, we can stay calm.
Thank you, Salima. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First to Frans and Anne. Yes, I very much welcome the support from France, but also from other countries to Ukraine, and I also welcome, of course, the efforts of the European Union, including through the European Peace Facility. These are efforts that are complementing what NATO allies are doing, and together we are able to provide unprecedented support to Ukraine. But also, as you alluded to or indicated, NATO allies and partners and the European Union are not party to the conflict. What we do is that we support Ukraine's self-defense. Ukraine has the right to defend itself. That's enshrined in the UN Charter, and we are helping them to uphold that right. That does not make us party to the conflict. Then you asked me about how can we then further strengthen what we do as NATO and the European Union when Finland and Sweden joins the EU. Well, I think that only makes it even clearer that we have a lot in common, because when Finland and Sweden joins NATO, then of course, then 96%, almost 100% or 96% of the people living in the European Union, they will live in a NATO country. So of course it becomes even more obvious that NATO is the core for or the basis for our collective defense, for our security, and the need for NATO and the European Union to work even more closely together. Then Italy and Luca. Again, let me thank you for what Italy does to provide support to Ukraine. I'm very impressed, actually, about what so many allies have done over such a long time to provide different types of support. But you asked me about the critical components, the risk of having not safe or not stable and not reliable supply lines or chains of supply, and that's exactly what we now are addressing at NATO, because we have seen so clearly that we cannot be dependent on or too dependent on authoritarian regimes when it comes to critical commodities, critical components. Of course, we will still trade with China, but we need to be aware of the vulnerabilities that too heavy dependence on specific commodities, products can create. And that's something which has now been addressed in NATO. We just convened them for the first time in NATO's history, a meeting of our senior officials on resilience to coordinate this, because even if these issues normally are regarded as economic and trade issues, they have direct implications for our security, and therefore we need to address them also as a NATO alliance. And there is no way. I think that not so many months ago we actually had a discussion about whether gas from Russia was only a commercial issue or a commercial issue with direct security implications. And I think we all have seen that to be too dependent on Russian gas also has security implications, because Russia is weaponizing the export of gas. And only back in 2019, we had a big discussion among NATO allies whether 5G and also whether the Chinese company Huawei, whether that was only a kind of a commercial economic issue, or whether who actually controls 5G networks is, yes, it is an economic and a commercial issue, but it is an economic and commercial issue with huge security consequences. So therefore we also need to take into account security considerations when we decide on 5G. So the awareness about these issues have increased enormously in NATO. We need to do more. We need to develop guidelines. We have some resilience guidelines. We need to improve them. We need to coordinate. We need to share information to ensure that we don't see once again what we have now seen with Russian gas. Then Salma, also the Netherlands. Yes, also the missile incident in Poland reminds us of the fact that wars are dangerous. 2 people were killed in Poland, and in wars accidents happen, and therefore it is extremely important that we are vigilant, that we monitor very closely, but also that we react in a calm and measured way, but also firm way, as we did after the incident in Poland. The incident is ongoing, so there are no absolute final conclusion, but we have no indication that this was a deliberate attack. We don't have any indication that that this was a Russian missile, and so far we have the most likely reason is that it was a Ukrainian air defense missile that fell down in Poland. But let me then add the important thing, and that is that Russia bears the responsibility. Because what we do know with certainty is that this wouldn't have happened hadn't Russia invaded Ukraine, and hadn't Russia the same day launched roughly 100 missiles against Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine has the right to defend themselves. So the responsibility for this is Russia's. And we welcome and we welcome the fact that Poland and Ukraine are now working together on the investigation. That's fine. It's important, and we need to find out exactly what happened. But it doesn't change the political reality. That it just highlights the importance of Russia ending this war as soon as possible and stop attacking Ukraine with missiles and drones.
Thank you. Our next three questioners are Jiří Horák of the Czech Republic, Theo Franken from Belgium, and David Johan Vataful from Germany. Jiří.
Thank you. Dear Mr. Secretary General, I'm interested in your view of the future of Allied defense spending. Since it will be discussed at the Vilnius summit next year, I would like to know your prognosis. Are there plans to increase the pledge from 2% of GDP, or rather to make rules as to how the money is spent? Thank you.
Thank you. Theo.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about Sweden and Finland joining our alliance. I think it's very important to show unity. That means that we cannot delay their membership. So my question is, are there external diplomatic efforts that are taken to convince Hungary and Turkey to accept and to vote the membership in their parliaments? I understood from my Fidesz colleague yesterday that Hungary will vote the 7th of December, so that's good news. But Turkey, they have elections also, so I hope it will not take 1 year to have that vote. We need to show unity on all and show all efforts to get them in, because we need Finland and Sweden. It's in their interest, but it's also in our interest of our alliance to get them as soon as possible in our alliance. They're most welcome. From our point of view, we had voted this in Belgian Parliament within weeks. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Theo. David.
Thank you, Chair. Can I use the opportunity to thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your extraordinary service in our alliance, and that you stayed in this post, though there were alternatives for you personally. Really, you're I think you are the anchorman of our alliance. My question is that the Russian attack on Ukraine also learned us a new lesson, that the status of being partner of NATO does not deter a potential aggressor. What does that now mean for our NATO relationship to other partner states like Georgia? Thank you.
Thank you. And again, all of you concise thank you. Mr. Secretary General.
First, to the Czech Republic, Jiří, about the defense spending. Yes, I believe that defense spending will be an important, very important issue at the Vilnius summit. I cannot tell you exactly what allies will agree when it comes to formulating the pledge for defense spending for the next decade. Also, because we finalized now the pledge we made in 2014 for 2014 to 2024. But I expect that it will be as an even stronger commitment to increasing defense spending, and I expect that in one way or another, even though perhaps the 2% will be kept, it will be kept more as a kind of floor than a ceiling for defense spending. But these are negotiations that will go on, but I'm absolutely confident that the ambitions will be increased in one way or another, because everyone now sees the need for investing more, and we also welcome that allies that have been below 2% now are setting new and more ambitious targets, and more allies are investing more, just because the world is more dangerous. Then you asked me about how to spend. Yes, well, we have the NATO defense planning process, which ends up with very specific capability targets for each and every ally. So there is a link between the ambition of spending more and the targets we agree for different capabilities that allies need to provide, with the more heavy equipment, with more air defense systems, with higher readiness, and many other specific defense capabilities that allies should provide according to the agreed NATO capability targets. Then Belgium and Theo. Well, there are. Also, the Swedish Prime Minister went to Ankara. I have been in Istanbul, met with President Erdogan, and of course we have a good conversation within the alliance on the ratification process. Then let me just remind you of the following: that so far the accession process for Finland and Sweden has been the quickest ever in NATO's modern history. I mean, we have to understand that it has hardly happened quicker any time before, because Finland and Sweden applied in May, and then just a few weeks later in June, all 30 allies agreed to invite them to become members, and a couple of days later, all 30 allies signed the accession protocol, and already 28 out of 30 allies have now ratified. This is very fast, extremely quick, has not happened before in NATO's modern history. So yes, of course, I would very much like the two remaining allies to ratify, and I have expressed that many times. But we have to understand that this is so far a quick process. Let me also add that Finland and Sweden are in a very different place now than they were before they applied. Because since they applied in May, several NATO allies, including the United Kingdom, United States, and many other European allies, have issued security assurances to Finland and Sweden. NATO has increased its presence, and 28 allies have already ratified, and all allies have signed the accession protocol. So it's absolutely inconceivable that if Finland or Sweden are subject to any kind of coercion or aggression by Russia against their countries, that NATO will not act. So it's not as if nothing has happened. They are extremely close to us. They have received security assurances, and Finland and Sweden participate in NATO's military and civilian activities in many different ways. So yes, I want the finalization of the accession protocol, but we have already achieved a lot just by what allies have done since they applied. Germany, David, you point out a very important point, and that is, of course, that we have a responsibility as allies, of course, to protect each other as NATO allies, but we also have a responsibility to ensure that our close partners, especially those who are most vulnerable for Russian coercion and aggression, like Georgia, that already have experienced Russian military aggression back in 2008, that we support them. And I strongly believe that as long as we don't achieve, or we are not able to get full membership for these countries, then we should at least provide them with significant support. If there's any lesson from Ukraine, is that we should have supported Ukraine even more, even earlier. I would like to praise those allies that actually helped and supported Ukraine since 2014. NATO provided some support, some capacity building, some training, but we could have done more before the invasion. And that's exactly the same with Georgia and other countries that are our close partners. But I remember, for instance, I went to Yavoriv, which is a training site in West Ukraine, not so far from Lviv, and there I saw back in 2015 the United States, Canada, but also United Kingdom, providing extensive training to Ukrainian forces. And of course, this training has been extremely important now after invasion. So if anything, we need more support for Georgia, more support for Moldova, more support for other partners at risk now. That's the lesson learned from Ukraine, and you have to help me, because then we need money from your parliaments.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Our next three questioners are Trond Helleland from Norway, Matej Tonen from Slovenia, and Najal Fridbetsson from Iceland. Trond.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Jens, I asked you this question in Brussels 3 days before Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine. Now the circumstances have changed. Norway shares a land border and a long maritime border with Russia, and we have long been NATO's eyes and ears in High North. Now we wholeheartedly welcome our Nordic brothers, Sweden and Finland, into NATO. The accession of Sweden and Finland will be good for the alliance as a whole and for all the Nordics. Now we get a longer border with Russia because of Finland's long border. But Norway will still be the only country in the region with a maritime border to Russia in the Barents Sea. At the same time, NATO membership for Sweden and Finland might also change how we currently think about supply routes across the Atlantic, defense planning in the Nordic region, and the relationship between the High North and the Baltic Sea. How, in your view, will Sweden and Finland's NATO membership affect NATO's and Norway's role in the High North? Thank you.
Thank you, Trond. Matej.
Honorable Secretary General, dear Jens, thank you for your extraordinary leadership in this demanding time. It was a privilege to cooperate with you in the last 3 years. Finland and Sweden are security contributors. It is in our interest that both countries become a full NATO members. Months ago, it seemed that Sweden and Finland won't become NATO members because of blockade. At that time, you stepped in and facilitated the dialogue. Can we expect from the Secretary General to step in the process again and accelerate it if needed?
Thank you. Najal.
Yes, thank you, President Connolly and Mr. Secretary General. We are all aware that the Arctic is becoming increasingly important in its strategic security and economic dimensions. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine ends a post-Cold War era of low tension and cooperation, such events highlight how hard it is for states to monitor their own waters, particularly in the High North. With Finland and Sweden joining, 7 out of 8 Arctic Council states will be NATO allies, which I believe will directly affect Russia's calculus and possible responses in the region. While our common goal is stability and cooperation in the Arctic, we must consider the possibility of Russia deciding to employ a more confrontational force posture in the region, as well as in the Baltic. Can you elaborate on that possibility and NATO's role in that region? And finally, it goes without saying that Iceland strongly supports Finland and Sweden's imminent application for membership in NATO. Thank you, General Secretary, for an outstanding job.
Thank you, Najal. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. I think actually I will answer the question from Iceland and Norway, from Njål and from Trond together, because partly because Iceland and Sweden used to be, Iceland and Norway used to be the same country for many hundred years ago, before the Danes came and created some problems there. But more importantly, because you asked about the same issue about Finland and Sweden and the High North, and fundamentally, Finnish and Swedish membership will strengthen NATO in the High North. There's no doubt, because Finland and Sweden are extremely capable countries. We know that because they have been very close partners with NATO for many years. They have advanced systems. They have Finland has a large army. They have advanced defense industries. They have high-end capabilities. And they have well-organized defense forces and strong democratic institutions. Therefore, they have been our closest partners for many years. We have worked together with them. We have trained together with them, so we know them well. And therefore, it's no doubt that they will strengthen NATO throughout the alliance, but of course, in particular in the north, because of the geographic location in the north. This will also help us to both increase our presence in the Barents Sea, in the High North. You are right, Trond, that Finland and Sweden, they don't have any coastline to the Barents Sea or the North Atlantic, but they have significant air capabilities that can help us to patrol and monitor also up in the High North. And of course also have naval capabilities that can be deployed up there. And of course especially Finland with the long border also has a knowledge about Russia which is unique. When Finland joins the alliance, NATO's border with Russia will more than double. So the Finnish border with Russia is longer than the total existing NATO-Russia border. So all of this will, of course, enhance our ability, both to deal with the challenges in the high north, but also in the Baltic. Because again, if you just look at the map, we have always been concerned about our ability to reinforce the Baltic, and we had the Suwalki gap with Finland and Sweden in alliance. It will change very much the geography when it comes to NATO's presence in the Baltic. There's no doubt that their membership will be good for NATO allies in many different ways, and therefore I welcome them. And Mateusz from Slovenia, it's good to see you again. We met often in the ministerial meetings, but now you asked me about whether I will step in. I never stepped out in a way that I have been working hard for enlargement of NATO since I arrived. First with first with Montenegro, then with North Macedonia, and then with Finland and Sweden. I like my family or our family to be bigger, and when there are candidates, we we work on that. And I'm glad that first we had 2 members from the Western Balkans, and now we will have 2 new members from the north. All of this is strengthening NATO across the board. So that's in my answer, whether we will step in. But let me add one more thing, and that is that and I engage, of course, with Finland, I engage with Sweden, I engage with Turkey. But let me remind you of the trilateral agreement that was signed here in Madrid in June. That was a trilateral agreement between Turkey, Finland, and Sweden. NATO didn't sign. We were in the room. Osman, again, you were there, yeah. But I didn't sign. I only welcomed the signing of the others. So meaning it's a trilateral agreement between those 3 countries. So at the end of the day, it's those 3 countries that have to ensure the full implementation. But I welcome that Finland and Sweden has delivered, and then I just think that the time has come for finalizing the ratification. Then that's all 3, because I lumped Finland and 2 of them together, Iceland and Norway.
And that was important to learn about that Iceland-Norway thing. The Secretary General faces many challenges in this tumultuous world, but he's already handled 15 questions from this body. So thank you for your patience. We got 3 more. Ante Bakic from Croatia, Arta Bilali Zendeli from North Macedonia, and Mati Redma from Estonia. Ante.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Dobar dan, and greetings from the Croatian delegation. You know, last month we held the first parliamentary summit of the International Crimea Platform in Zagreb, and which brought together 48 speakers of parliaments and presidents of interparliamentary organizations, like our president from NATO PA, Mr. Connolly, was there. In Zagreb, we proudly demonstrated support to Ukraine, and I would like to hear your comments and thoughts about how to politically approach another issue that in a way bothers NATO and the EU in the Southeast Europe. It is an issue of somehow stalled NATO's political outreach in the Western Balkan countries. I mean the political interaction and practical cooperation with regard, you mentioned the country Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also in Kosovo. The interaction do exist, but the feeling is that everything that has been done in the past has been overshadowed by the malign foreign influence that keeps these countries blocked in a kind of endless limbo and miles away from the further alignment with our common values and political posture. In terms of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo, what else beyond being simply vigilant can NATO do in order to counter foreign political goal of undermining those countries and preventing them to become more stable and secure on the path of the EU and NATO? Thank you.
Thank you, Ante. Arta.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, before the war we all thought that Russia has very tight links with China, and now somehow China is out of the picture. We saw recently some strong cooperation between Russia and Iran, but again I will repeat, China is out. My question is, where do you see the role of China in the picture, and how do you assess its not active role or position after the war or after the Russian invasion in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. And Matti.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Secretary General, my question addressing again air defense issue. Today's genocidal war by Russia in Ukraine is a clear testimony that Russia violates all international rules and agreed principles, and inhuman and unacceptable attacks on the population and civil infrastructure without any military meaning is today's new reality. I call all NATO members to make greater and faster efforts than today to support the military capability of Ukraine. The future of not only Ukraine depends on it, but the future of all of us. In connection with the new reality presented above, the need to secure also the missile and air defense capability of NATO, especially the territories of its eastern flank, is getting a new and broader meaning today. Also the need for more forced action plan. Could you share your views on this matter? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First to Ante and Croatia on the Kosovo and Bosnia. As you know, the Western Balkans matters for NATO. We have a long history there. We helped to end the two brutal wars, first in Bosnia and later on in Kosovo, Serbia. And we also helped to stabilize North Macedonia almost 20 years ago. And we still have a presence. We have our headquarters in Sarajevo, we have the office in Belgrade, and of course we have the KFOR forces in Kosovo, and we also have now several members in the region, full-fledged NATO allies. I mentioned North Macedonia and Montenegro as two of our newest members. All of this makes the Western Balkans an important region for NATO. In Kosovo, while we continue our presence, we support by our military presence the EU-led efforts for a diplomatic solution. We support the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, and I think it demonstrates actually how well NATO and the European Union can work together, complementing each other with the NATO forces supporting the EU diplomatic efforts in Kosovo. We also work closely with EU in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and at the Madrid summit we decided to step up political and practical support for our partners in the Western Balkans, including Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to help them to resist malign influence from Russia. We are also stepping up our support to Bosnia and Herzegovina in different ways in order to help them, including by more and enhanced defense capacity building, a new package of defense capacity building efforts for Bosnia and Herzegovina to help them to implement its plans for modernization of its defense and security institutions. We are working closely to help them. It's not easy, but we will continue to do what we can to help to address the instability and the challenges, and including the malign influence of especially Russia in the region. Then Arta, North Macedonia, the role of China related to the Ukraine conflict, if I understood the question right. Well, first of all, we have called on China, and that was also my message when I met with the Chinese foreign minister in New York during the UN General Assembly, that China should clearly condemn the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. They have not voted in favor of the different UN resolutions doing so, but we call on them to do that.
And also, of course, we regret that just days before the invasion, Russia and China signed a joint declaration, or President Putin and President Xi signed this joint declaration where they stated that the partnership with Russia and China, between Russia and China, is without limits. Having said that, of course, we also welcome that China, at least so far, has not provided any military support to Ukraine. This is important. No one should support Ukraine. Russia in their efforts to occupy Ukraine. No one should provide support to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and that has also been a clear message from NATO allies to China. Then Matti from Estonia on air defenses. Well, air defenses is extremely important. But I think sometimes we need to realize that air defenses is partly land-based systems, like the Patriot batteries or the SAM-T batteries and these land-based systems, or the NASAMS, which I've seen very effective in Ukraine. But air defense systems are also very often based on ships, and they are extremely capable and very mobile, and also, of course, planes. Our jet fighters are also an important part of our air defense systems, partly with the sensors, but also partly because of their capability to intercept incoming missiles or other types of air attacks. So the fact that we have significantly increased our presence both on land but also at sea and in the air in the Baltic region and in the east, and that we can very quickly reinforce if needed. I visited recently the USS George H.W. Bush, the aircraft carrier. It was based in the Adriatic Sea, but those capabilities on that aircraft carrier, supported by ships from Italy, from Turkey, from many other NATO allies, they represent a huge capability also when it comes to air defense. So yes, we need to do more on air defense, but we should not underestimate the capabilities we already have in place, and also our ability to reinforce with air and naval assets quickly if needed.
Thank you. You doing all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So our next three are Zsolt Nemeth from Hungary, Anna Maria Katata from Romania, and Raymond Bergmanis from Latvia. Zsolt.
Thank you very much, President. I am right to you, Secretary General. Right to you. I would like to greet you in the name of the Hungarian delegation and express our gratitude for your work and for your presence here. I think you have been instrumental in maintaining the unity of the alliance in the past period, and I would like to congratulate you on that. My original question would have related the Western Balkans, but probably you have covered it more or less in the previous round. So I would like to ask you a question which relates the European political community. On the 6th of October, President Macron has initiated this new format. And in the Council of Europe and in parliamentary level, we are fighting with this challenge. What is the role of this organization relating to the Council of Europe, relating to NATO? And I think it is just in the formation. And may I ask you if you have any position, personal position, because probably not yet official one. How do you see the relationship between NATO and this new European format, which targets at security aims as well? It seems that the security dimension of this European political community is quite decisive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zsolt. Anna Maria.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, Secretary General. The summit in Madrid marked a very important moment for the alliance in general, but also for the eastern flank. And with the new battle groups that will be in place for different European countries on the eastern flank, including Romania, the deterrence and defense of the eastern flank will be more balanced, and we are very excited about having them fully operational. But you mentioned earlier the lessons learned from Ukraine, and my question would be, in terms of a more multi-domain perspective, what will the Vilnius summit discuss on the defense and defense of the eastern flank, including cyber, including space, and why not including maritime security and the free flow of trade? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Raymond.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary General, I'm not going to repeat what Russia did and continue to do in Ukraine, but my question is about security of Russia's neighbors, namely the Baltic states. Taking into consideration that one of the major subjects for our NATO PA, Defense and Security Committee, for next year will be evolving Baltic Sea security. Could you elaborate on that? How the NATO started to work on the new plans for security of the Baltic states, and after full accessions of Sweden and Finland about plans for security of the all Baltic Sea region? We hope and we would like to believe that both our colleagues, Sweden and Finland, will be able to participate in the next NATO summit as full-fledged members. By the way, next summit will be held again in the Baltics, this time in Vilnius.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First, the question from Salt, Hungary, on the European political community. Well, also, NATO allies and also non-allies that were present there, of course, they meet in different formats and in different organizations and institutions. And I think in general it's good that allies and close partners in Europe meet in different ways. As long as we all are aware of that the bedrock for our security remains NATO. Because the bedrock for our security is transatlantic. And there's no way that can be replaced. As I said many times before, I welcome European efforts on defense. And I welcome EU efforts on defense, on providing more capabilities, PESCO to address the fragmentation of the European defense industry, or the European Defence Fund, and many other efforts. That's very important and something I welcome. And of course, any meaningful strengthening of European defences requires more defence spending, and NATO has been calling for increased defence spending across Europe for years, and now that's happening, and that's a good thing. But this can only complement, not replace NATO. Because 2 world wars and the Cold War taught us that our security is totally dependent on the North Atlantic link, on the North Atlantic bond. Europe, North America, and Canada together. And I don't, and I'm therefore glad also that the message is that this is not any alternative to NATO. The aim is to complement and to strengthen what we do together. And I think also we have seen that in Ukraine. Of course, the reality is that there's a support from the United States and North America to North American countries has been critical for the gains that Ukrainians have made, and also the fact that especially Canada and the United States, they have been there since 2014. They have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. And then, of course, you have also allies that have supported Ukraine, especially since the invasion, but we need to do this as North America and Europe together. Then Anna Maria, Romania. Well, the multi-domain approach, of course, will be a part of what we address in Vilnius. As it has been actually for a long time. We have to remember that we are very much aware of that any military conflict in the future involving NATO allies, especially in a large-scale conflict, will be multi-domain. It will not only be land or sea or air. It will be land, sea, air, and cyber, and space. And space and cyber is integrated in everything we do. Our land operations, our operations at sea and in the air are totally dependent on cyber, of course. And cyber and our communications and targeting and a lot of things that we do on land or on Earth is dependent on space capabilities, satellites, GPS, navigation. So there is no way to not be multi-domain. We have to be multi-domain in everything we do, and that's also reflected in our new plans and the decisions you have made, both on cyber and space, establish them as a new military domains alongside air, sea, and land. Then Ramon, great to see you again. Latvia always, of course, focused on the Baltic region. Of course, when Finland and Sweden joins, we will also then adjust our defense plans and our defense planning processes to take that into account. And without going into details, partly because some of these plans are quite secret, it's everyone that looks at the map understands that it has a huge impact on our ability to protect and defend the Baltic region, and that increases our deterrence. And by doing so, we are further reducing the risk on any attack on any NATO ally, because the purpose of NATO is not to actually the main purpose of NATO is to preserve peace, is to prevent an attack. And the stronger our deterrence and defense is, the more likely it is, or the less likely it is that there will be any attack. And therefore I welcome also Finland and Sweden as members, because it will strengthen further our deterrence and defense across the lines.
Thank you. Our next three questioners are Risto Gatchev of Bulgaria, Mikhail Sherba of Poland, and Lord Hamilton from the UK. Is that a cheering section for you, Lord Hamilton? Okay, Risto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary General, first of all, I would like to say that the newly elected Parliament in Sofia, one of the first decisions that we made was to make a decision to send direct military support to Ukraine, and I think this is important for our country to do. I have two quick questions following the time. You mentioned a couple of times the air defense. You mentioned the air defense in the Baltics, but what about the southeastern flank? Should it be reinforced after the incident in Poland last week? And the second question is, what is the possibility of joining the efforts between NATO and the EU on resilience capacity building between the two organizations? As you mentioned, most of the EU citizens will live in NATO countries after the accession of Finland and Sweden. Thank you.
Thank you. Mikhail.
Mr. Secretary General, I'm here. Thank you for your strong leadership in these difficult times. We should be prepared for more hostile actions against Ukraine, but also against NATO states. Russia's aim are to weaken us, diminish our determination to support Ukraine, and we can't fall into Ukraine fatigue mode. Even today, this morning, our Assembly has shown responsible unity and soon will give a strong message of solidarity with Ukraine in our resolution. Russia's action against Ukraine are escalatory, and last week the massive attack on Ukraine's infrastructure was the largest since the beginning of the war. Recent incident in Polish territory is also a result of this escalation. Ukraine needs more Western advanced precision weapon, and we ask NATO governments for it. Two questions to you, Mr. Secretary General. In reference to escalation, how NATO can strengthen its military presence in the eastern flank? A lot has been done, but what should be the next steps? And the second question, do you agree we need to reflect better on threat from the territory of Belarus? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And Lord Hamilton.
Secretary General, you've emphasized to us how essential it is that the war is won in Ukraine and that the Russians are beaten. This would have happened already if we'd imposed a no-fly zone in Ukraine. People who are worried about a no-fly zone say that we would be inevitably in conflict with the Russians. That is because the air defense systems are the other side of the Russian border. We could create a cordon sanitaire, which meant that we were out of range of air defenses in Russia. And so what is the chance of, what's the military argument for imposing a no-fly zone? Surely it's quite possible to do this.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General.
First, restore from Bulgaria air defenses in the Black Sea region. Well, as we have increased our presence also in the Black Sea region, and as I said several times, this includes also air defense capabilities, and with our air and naval capabilities, it's also easy to quickly reinforce. But let me just add one more thing, and it's not as if NATO has some kind of unlimited access to NATO air defense systems. Of course, what we are dependent on is that allies provide air defense systems and that we pull them together. So, if anything, it just highlights the importance of allies meeting at least the 2% target and also delivering on the NATO capability targets to be able to provide the necessary capabilities to increase our air defense of NATO territory and our ability to reinforce. So this is what we do, but we are totally, as always, totally dependent on allies to deliver on what they have promised. Then you asked me about NATO EU. I think I've already said some few words about that, but let me just add that again, especially with Finland and Sweden inside. 96% of the people living in the EU live in a NATO country. That makes it just even more important that we avoid duplication. What the EU does is complementing NATO efforts, and of course, I'm personally a strong supporter of the EU. I've tried to convince the Norwegian people to join EU twice and lost twice. But I am arguing in favor of EU as I believe in the European Union as a concept, as an idea. But at the same time, we just need to realize that there are also many. First of all, we have North America, we have Canada and the United States, and they're not small nations. They actually contribute to our shared security. But second, we have also some Europeans outside the European Union. There is more Europe in NATO than there is Europe in EU. There are 450 million Europeans in the EU, and that's 600 million Europeans in NATO. So it's not. We need to ensure that we work together in NATO to address the security needs for all allies, inside or outside the EU. I welcome EU efforts, but it doesn't replace NATO, and it must not duplicate NATO. And I say that as really a strong friend of the EU, and also I'm proud that as Secretary General of NATO, I have been able to work together with the presidents, the leadership of the European Union, and also the different EU members to lift NATO-EU cooperation to unprecedented levels. Then Mikhail from Poland, you mentioned Ukraine fatigue, and that's extremely important what you said. And that is, we must prevent that from happening, because we cannot allow President Putin to win, and he should never believe that democracies are in a way not resilient, are not able to sustain an effort over time. And as I said, this is because it will be a catastrophe for Ukraine, but it will also be extremely dangerous for us, because then the lesson learned will be that by using force, he gets exactly what he wants. So this is also about our security interests. But to prevent any fatigue, to enable us to continue to support, at the end of the day, there's only one thing that depends on, and that is the support from our public. So we need the support, and you are closer to them than anyone else. because you are elected representatives from your different constituencies. So I do what I can. I travel around and argue in favor of support to Ukraine. But you need, and I know that you do that, but we need your support in the different member states, allies, to ensure that people understand why we need to pay a price to ensure freedom and democracy, and that is in our interest. Sorry, you asked also about what we will do to further increase. So first of all, we have doubled the number of battle groups from 4 to 8. We did that after we have done that over the last months. Second, what we agreed in Madrid is that we have to be able to scale these battle groups up to brigade size level. We will start to exercise and test that, and the way we do that is to have earmarked forces. For instance, Germany have now earmarked a brigade that can be deployed to Lithuania on very short notice. They will exercise and so on. So there will be a close link between those forces and the ability to scale up the brigade or the battle group to a brigade size on very short notice. Second, we are going to pre-position more supplies and more equipment. And again, you see in the war in Ukraine how important supplies, ammunition, equipment is. And thirdly, we will increase the readiness of forces. So where needed, we can deploy forces quickly. And then there are a wide range of other things we will do on air, naval capabilities, cyber, that also matters for the defense of the eastern part of the alliance. Then Lord Hamilton, also on the no-fly zone. I am aware that this has been an issue. It was raised at the beginning of the war. I think that for allies, it is important that we are not party to the conflict. And if we started to deploy forces into Ukraine, we would become party to the conflict. But allies are very determined to help Ukraine defend their own airspace. And that's exactly what they have done by providing all the air defense systems, the ammunition to the air defense systems. The UK have done that, extremely important, but also the fact that they are providing training. Again, UK is leading training efforts. I just visited the United Kingdom, and I met there with British trainers, but also with trainers from Denmark, from Lithuania, from Canada, from many other countries that are helping to train Ukrainian soldiers also with air defense capabilities in United Kingdom as a joint effort by many NATO allies, and United Kingdom has actually provided training to Ukraine since 2014, and this makes a huge difference. So we will help them to protect their airspace, and that's the way we will ensure that they are able to shoot down Russian missiles, drones, and strengthen their control over their own airspace.
I thank the Secretary General. I would only note that we had no-fly zones in Iraq, in the north and in the south, and we in fact did engage with and shoot down Iraqi aircraft. And so the risk of engagement when you have to enforce a no-fly zone is very real. And our goal is to constrain and end this war, obviously, not to expand it. Our last, if you're willing, our last three questioners are Manousis Volodakis from Greece, Hans Wallmark from Sweden, and Mikko Savola from Finland. Manousis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. General Secretary, you said that the accession process of Sweden and Finland has been the quickest yet. Nevertheless, it might be not quick enough because it is the only one that has been going on while war rages on in our backyard. Finland and Sweden, and moreover, there are no procedural issues with this. There are political issues, in particular Turkey's objections. Finland and Sweden had to declare something that's a self-evident truth to most of us, that they do not nurture terrorism. 5 months have passed and we still see no progress. To the citizens of member states, the question is raised, what is going on? Are there any concerns regarding the ability of Finland and Sweden to counter terrorism? Thank you.
Thank you. Hans.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you that the Secretary General reminded of the special relations between Iceland and Norway. Let me remind the Secretary General of the special relations between Sweden and Norway.
If the gentleman would suspend, we cannot hear the question because of discussion. If you're going to have discussions, I would respectfully ask you to take them out of the plenary session. The gentleman may resume.
Thank you. Well, let me remind the Secretary General of the special relations between Sweden and Norway. We share the kingdom for 100 years. And we are very fortunate to have very good neighbors, but we also try to be a good neighbor and a good ally, and that is also our intention, together with Finland inside NATO. We see ourselves and Finland as security provider into NATO, and we also have this broad concept on security. It's on the hard defense, but also on the fight against terrorism, and therefore I hope that in the coming days we can also convince Turkey of this trilateral agreement, that we are delivering on it. And I really want to ensure that Sweden and Finland also taking with us and transmit all the good words, all the friendly cheering and the support for our countries into NATO, because I think that everything is linked to each other. So the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea and High North are linked together, and therefore we're going to be a provider of security. So in Swedish, tack, in Finnish, kiitos.
Thank you, Hans. Nico.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's easy to continue what the brother from the Sweden just said. I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your support in our goal of becoming a member of NATO. And I also want to thank you all wonderful colleagues here, partners and friends welcoming us to the alliance. Almost all of you have ratified our membership in your parliaments already, and you did it very rapidly. As the Mr. Secretary General said, this has been the fastest process ever. Maybe one question to Mr. Secretary General. Finland and Sweden wants to be the security providers in NATO. In Finland we have a strong conscription army with over 900,000 reservists, and we are spending now that over 2% of the GDP to the defense cost. So you partly answered the question already, but how do you see the future role of Finland and Sweden in the NATO defense policy planning? Thank you all, wonderful colleagues, and Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. First to Malusis from Greece on Swedish and Finnish membership. There is a process, there is a dialogue, and I'm confident that Finland and Sweden will become. They are already invited. We already signed the accession protocol, but I'm confident that we'll be able to finalize the accession process within reasonable time. I will not speculate exactly when, but the sooner the better. But as I've said already, Finland and Sweden are in a very different place now than before they applied. It matters that all allies have signed the accession protocol. It matters that they are now participating in NATO's military and civilian structures. It matters that several NATO allies have issued security assurances, and it matters that NATO has increased its presence in the region. So it is absolutely inconceivable that there will be any kind of aggression against Finland and Sweden without NATO acting. So it's not as nothing has happened, a lot has happened already. Then we also have to remember that no other ally has suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey, and they have the right for self-defense. And they have some concerns. They've raised them, and now they are addressed by Finland and Sweden, and I welcome that very constructive process. Then Hans from Sweden. Yes, you are right. We are good neighbors, and for roughly 100 years we had the same king. The more surprising thing that the first common king we had was actually a French general, Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, who actually ended up as the Swedish king. And the last time Sweden was at war was against Norway, and since then it has been very peaceful, and then you join NATO. So this is a
little more bitterness coming out.
No, it's not bitterness. The strange thing with the Nordic countries is that they have been fighting for centuries, and now they're best friends, and they can joke with it. That's a good thing. But you're right, and you're right that the Nordic countries are all very close neighbors. They work very closely together, and of course it will strengthen also the cooperation in the High North when all the countries are part of the same security alliance, part of NATO, and that's something that will benefit the whole alliance. Then Nico Finland, you also spoke about the membership. Yes, also it will. By being together in NATO, we can work so even more closer together, and I think it's important also to convey the message to the rest of the alliance that this is not only good for the Nordics, but it's good for the whole alliance. It's obvious when it comes to the Baltics, the eastern part of the alliance, because we have then much better ways to reinforce that part of the alliance if needed. But it's also critical for the whole transatlantic link, because by increasing our strength in the High North, we also strengthening our capability to protect the vital links of communications, the sea lines across the North Atlantic. And that is actually what is binding North America and Europe together, and which is the fundamental link within the NATO alliance. And I also know that Finland and Sweden, they are ready to participate in different NATO missions and operations. They have been in Afghanistan, they have been in Iraq, they have participated also in many of the missions we are conducting in the south. And Sweden just announced that they will contribute more also to the NATO counter-terrorism fund. So actually I'm absolutely certain that this will benefit not only the north, but the whole of the alliance. Then I think I've covered all questions, and it's all. And then let me just end by saying, for me, it is always a pleasure to meet you, and I really mean it, because you are so important for the strength of this alliance. Without parliaments in our back, without parliaments supporting us, the efforts of NATO allies, there is no way that NATO can continue as the most successful alliance in history. So I thank you for your support, for your commitment, and what you do every day to ensure that NATO remains the most successful alliance in history. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We promised to have you out of here at 12:50, and it's 12:47, so... But thank you for always being there for us, and thank you for your critical leadership at a very difficult moment here in Europe. We know we're in steady hands having Jens Stoltenberg as the Secretary General of our alliance. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. I'll come meet you. So, let me just fill you in, we have some business left. We're going to do the Carl Lammerts Prize, and I see Carl, our former colleague, is here. And Julie, if you'd come up to sit in the chair and give the award, I'd really appreciate it. Then we will take a break. Please listen 1 second. So President Zelensky is on a schedule, as you might imagine, that's tight. So we're going to come back here at 1:50, and we're going to get in our seats, and we're going to have we're going to have him live at 1:55. So please be back at 1:50. After we give this award, Julie will then allow us to recess, to have lunch or coffee, and then we'll come back at 1:50. Thank you.
Hello. You guys, just 2 more minutes. Really, this is an important prize. I'd like to now give the floor to Karl Lammers from Germany. And for those that don't know, Mr. Lammers used to be the former president of NATO PA. He's going to be announcing the winners of the Karl Lammers Peace Prize. Karl, you have 2 minutes.
Dear Madam Chair, dear President-elect.
Can we please have 2 more minutes, you guys? Just 2 more minutes.
Use the gavel.
Thank you.
Dear Madam Chair, dear President-elect, dear Joël, dear Secretary General, dear Ruxandra, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you as chairman of my Peace Foundation that I established 4 years ago in 2018 in my constituency Heidelberg. In the spirit of furthering my lifelong political engagement towards peace and freedom, I want to encourage young people, pupils, students, and young researchers to think about the importance of peace and freedom in these dangerous, dark, and most challenging times for our world. I think of Russia's brutal war in Ukraine that has turned our worst fears into reality, but Ukrainians are heroically fighting back. Slava Ukraini! I think of Iran, where thousands of brave women and men are risking their lives to demand freedom and basic human rights. In these times, it is especially important that young people have an understanding that freedom of speech, freedom of press and media, freedom of assembly, and many more, is something so precious and cannot be taken for granted. It is essential for us to win the hearts and minds, especially of the young peoples in our country. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, in 2019, the Peace Foundation started its essay competition in 3 different areas. In my former constituency, Heidelberg, in Lithuania, as I have a strong connection to Mykolos Romeris University in this great state, and here in the framework of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly with its 30 member states. On December 8th, I will present the prize to a prize winner for the first time at the University of Heidelberg too. On the 2nd of April this year, the 4th essay competition was launched. The Peace Foundation invited students to submit their essays on this year's topic. What are 2 key lessons learned for NATO from Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Let me thank especially our Secretary General Ruxandra Popa and our Deputy Secretary General Henrik Blidal for their great support and their help to publish the calls for papers, as well as to evaluate and select this year's winners. Today, it is my great pleasure to proudly present the 3 winners. I congratulate everyone for their splendid work. The quality of this year's papers was very good. The 3 winner essays that will be awarded with the Dr. Karl Lammers Peace Prize today are: 3rd prize goes to Katrin Rief, student of political science and public law of the University of Heidelberg. Her essay highlights the need for the alliance to build up its deterrence and defense capabilities in response to Russia's war in Ukraine. In particular, she points out the need to be better prepared for high-intensity conflicts, to step up defense spending, to beef up NATO structures command, and to enhance NATO's cyber defense. As a second lesson, Mrs. Reeve argues that allies should enhance their partnerships with like-minded nations, including the Indo-Pacific region, to win as many partners for our democratic ideas as possible. Congratulations to her and all the best for her further studies. The winner of the second prize is Aida Loca Arce, student of Master in International Security at the University of Groningen. Aida Loca Arce explains how Russia's war against Ukraine has brought home to allied populations the potential risks to their values and the sovereignty of their states. She argues that the need for increased defense spending is a first lesson allies must learn from Russia's war. In her view, a second lesson is that NATO's deterrence function has worked in preventing an attack against allies, and that nuclear deterrence in particular has proved essential in preventing global conflict. Congratulations to her. Very good essay. And finally, let me come to the winner of this year's essay competition. The first prize goes to Noah Heinemann, who is studying political science and economics. In his excellent piece, Noah Heinemann argues that Russia's assault on Ukraine makes a scenario of an attack on the Baltic states no longer unthinkable. This requires a shift in NATO's deterrence and defense posture in the East from the current tripwire approach to a posture deterrence by denial. He also argues that Europeans need to step up and invest more in defense, including more joint procurement. Superbly written, the paper is awarded with €1,000. Congratulations to him. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to read one or all three greatly written essays, please give me a signal. Thank you once more, Ruxandra and Hendrik, for supporting us with the evaluation of our submissions. In spring 2023, we will launch the next essay competition. I would be very glad if you, dear colleagues, would help me to distribute the call for papers and send it to all students and universities you know. And now, toward the end of my speech, I would like to offer a heartfelt word of thanks to our President, Jerry Connolly. And I ask you to give him my kind regards.
Happy to.
Jerry Connolly has been a great president, and he is still a great leader in a very difficult time. My thanks for his great work, his transatlantic commitment, and his fight, his struggle for a center of democratic resilience has strengthened the NATO PA in a grand way. So, once more, thank you to Jerry Connolly for his personal friendship and especially also for his strong support of my Peace Foundation. Thank you very much and all the best.
Thank you, Mr. Lammers, and congratulations to all the winners. And just to remind everyone, we're taking a break for lunch, and we have to return here in our seats by 13:50. So 10 minutes to 2, so that we could hear from President Zelensky. Thanks so much. Enjoy your lunch.